I was a fan of detective fiction before I started studying Spanish, and when I was in a class at the University of Michigan in 1954, the text, one of the texts, was a collection of Borges short stories called La Muerte y la Brújula, Death and the Compass. And I was astonished to realize when I read it that it was Borges's extraordinary original version of a regular detective versus criminal story. And no one had ever written a story like that before. I was just dazzled. And I had begun correspondence with an Argentine writer, translator, whose name was Rodolfo Jorge Walsh. His specialty was detective fiction, and he later became an investigative journalist, the first investigative journalist in Argentina. I wrote him and said I'd read this extraordinary story, and would he see if he could put me in touch with Borges, because I wanted to ask permission to see if I could bring it into English. And Rudy wrote back by return mail. He not only asked Borges, he went to Borges and got Borges to sign in his scratchy little hand, he was blind by then, that he authorized me to translate Death and the Compass, and a book of detective short stories that he'd written with his dear friend Adolfo Bioy Casares, 6 Problems for Don Isidro Parodi, and anything else that I felt might be worthy, to translate into what he considered his language of preference, English. He was bilingual. His father was son of an English woman, and she and his father lived with Borges for the first 36 years of his life. So he had the 2 languages. So I started up, and after a couple of stories, I thought that this writer is so good that maybe we can do a book of his stories and essays. And I started translating. By 1957, I had a pretty good collection of my own translations and a half a dozen by other translators who had done good versions that I thought would be okay too. I happened to mention the plan to do the anthology collection to a classmate of mine from Michigan days. His name's James Irby, and he asked me to express his thanks for providing this evening for us to talk for 5 minutes about Labyrinths. I got a contract from James Laughlin. I had tried, believe it or not, the obvious publisher back in around 1957-58, Grove Press. And Grove Press took the manuscript, sent me a letter saying they would have a look at it and let me know. 2 weeks later, I got a nice letter from Barney Rossett's secretary, signed by Barney Rossett, saying, in so many words, thanks, but no thanks. I've kept that letter, and in a moment you'll understand why I prize it. When I let Jim Irby know that I had a contract, he said, well, that's interesting, because I've been translating Borges's essays. And I said, oh, you're publishing them? He said, no, I'm just translating them to get a feel of Borges' prose. He was writing his dissertation with the same professor I did on Borges. I did mine on the Argentine detective story, predictably enough, and he did his on the structure of Borges' stories. Jim Irby sent me the translations. They were very good, and I decided, Jim, why don't we do the book together? So James Irby and I shared the contract with New Directions. The contract was 1960. And by 1961, Borges was totally unknown anyplace. He was hardly known in his own country. But he had a couple of friends who attended the meeting of the International Editors Prize, which was held in Formentor, and they put Borges forward as deserving of the $10,000 first prize, International Editors Prize. He won people over on the basis of what the committee editors had read of what he had published in the languages that they were publishing works in: German, French, Italian, so forth, English. And he won the prize in kind of collaboration, in conjunction with Samuel Beckett. So the $10,000 prize was shared, and all of a sudden the world was puzzled, didn't know who this Jorge Luis Borges was. Well, right around that time, Labyrinths was pretty much ready for publication. And the timing was right, because Borges got the Fermenter in 61, and this came out in 62. Now, part of the Fermenter Prize was all the publishers there agreed to publish a text by Borges in their individual languages. And this was not part of that, because New Directions were not one of the publishers. But this was on its way and very close to publication. Guess who decides to come out with a translation of one of Borges' books? Barney Rossett at Grove Press. So, what happens? This has been long in preparation. Ficciones is rushed through and is published right around the same time. And it wasn't a bad thing, because receiving a book, having a book editor receive a book review editor, by an unknown Argentine author might be easy to discard. But 2 books by the same author at practically the same time got a lot of people's attention. And the 2 books were published almost together, reviewed almost together every place. In 62, the book came out. In 64, it went into paperback. In 1970, London saw the Penguin Labyrinths for the first time. And in 1985, it went into the Modern Library. And in 2007, we finally got our chance, James and I, to touch up the book. There had been typos and so forth that had persisted for a long time, and we got the chance to correct it. And when that came out, Penguin brought out a new edition of it. New Directions brought out a new edition of it, with a new preface by William Gibson, to interest a younger group of people in Borges' work. And the Folio Society in London brought out a beautiful edition, as they always do, of Labyrinths. That's the background, and the opportunity that Jim Laughlin gave James Irving and I was such a boost that both of us spent a good part of our career studying, reading, and criticizing the entire work, and I worked with him on his entire life because I knew him for 15 years very well. Well, I appreciate enormously what James Laughlin did to me at a very critical time, and I'm happy that this book has been such a successful one for New Directions.